You know, they say that time heals all wounds, and for a long while, I actually believed that. I had spent the last 2 years carefully reconstructing my life piece by piece like a person trying to put a shattered mirror back together. At 35, you start to value peace over everything else. You value the quiet mornings, the predictable routines, and the fact that you can finally breathe without feeling a heavy weight on your chest. 2 years ago, when he walked out of my life, I thought the worst was over. I thought the tears I cried then were the final payment on a debt I didn't know I owed. I had moved on. I had found my rhythm again, or at least that's what I told myself until this Tuesday. It started like any other Tuesday. The light was just beginning to fade, casting long amber shadows across my living room. I was winding down from work, scrolling through my phone with a glass of wine in hand, enjoying the silence of my own space. Then my phone buzzed. It wasn't just a notification, it was a flurry of them. One text, then another, then a link from a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. The message simply said, "I am so sorry I didn't know if I should send this to you, but you need to see what's going viral." My heart did that weird, uncomfortable skip, the kind you feel right before something life-changing happens. I clicked the link. It was a video from a local news station, one of those feel-good human interest stories that people share because they want to believe in magic. The headline read, "Love Takes Flight Romantic Surprise Proposal at Terminal 3. I watched my breath catching in my throat as the camera panned to a man standing near the arrivals gate. He was holding a bouquet of lilies, my favorite flowers, or so I had once thought. It was him, my ex. The man who had looked me in the eye 2 years ago and told me he just needed to find himself, that he wasn't ready for forever, and that he needed to be alone to figure out his path. There he was, looking more polished than I remembered, dressed in a sharp blazer, his face glowing with a kind of excitement I hadn't seen in years. Then the woman walked through the sliding doors. She was beautiful, beaming with a radiant, unsuspecting smile. He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the crowded airport, oblivious to the hundreds of travelers rushing past. The news anchor's voiceover kicked in, dripping with sentimental sweetness. After 3 years of dating, the anchor chirped, Mark decided it was finally time to ask the big question. 3 years? The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I felt the air leave my lungs. I actually had to lean against the kitchen counter to keep from falling over. My brain started doing the math, frantic and desperate, trying to find a version of reality where those numbers didn't mean what I knew they meant. We broke up exactly 2 years ago. We had been together for 5 years before that. If they had been dating for 3 years, that meant for an entire year. 365 days of I love yous. 365 days of sharing a bed, 365 days of planning a future. He was living a double life. Suddenly, every work trip he took during our final year together flashed before my eyes. I remembered the late nights he spent at the office, the weekends he had to fly to Chicago for urgent meetings, and the way he would leave his phone face down on the nightstand. Back then, I chose to trust him. I chose to believe that his distance was just stress, that his frequent absences were just a symptom of his ambition. I felt like I was watching a horror movie where I was the only one who didn't know the killer was already in the house. I replayed the video. I watched his face as he slid the ring onto her finger. The news station had edited it with soft piano music, making it look like a fairy tale. To the thousands of people liking and sharing that video, he was a hero. He was the ultimate romantic, but to me, he was a ghost that had just turned into a monster. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was the Truman Show effect, the dizzying, terrifying realization that the world I thought I lived in was a lie, and everyone else seemed to be in on the secret but me. I stayed in that spot on my kitchen floor for a long time, the blue light of my phone screen illuminating the dark room. I felt humiliated, not just because he cheated, but because of the scale of the deception. How do you look someone in the face every single morning for a year while you are building a completely different life with someone else? How do you keep the names straight? The stories, the lies. I felt like a fool for every time I had comforted him when he complained about being tired from travel. I had packed his bags. I had made him coffee before those early flights. I had been his partner while he was already someone else's. I didn't realize I had started crying until a tear hit the screen of my phone, blurring the image of them kissing in the terminal. My first instinct was to delete everything, to throw the phone across the room and pretend I never saw it. But the world had other plans. My friends, my fierce, loyal, and currently very angry friends, had also seen the video. And unlike me, they weren't in shock. They were in combat mode. Before I could even process my own grief, I saw the comment section of the news station's post begin to transform. It went from "congratulations" and "so sweet" to something much darker. My best friend Sarah was the first to strike. She didn't hold back. She posted a photo of us, me and him, at a Christmas party from 2.5 years ago with a caption that laid it all bare. "Funny," she wrote, "considering he was living with my best friend until 2 years ago, the math isn't mathing, Mark." And then the floodgates open. Other friends, people I hadn't talked to since the breakup, and even some acquaintances who knew the timeline started piling on. They weren't just defending me, they were dismantling him. They were pointing out the dates, the overlaps, and the sheer audacity of him going on the news with a lie that was so easily debunked. I watched the comments tick up. 50, 100, 500. The feel-good story was turning into a public execution. Part of me, the hurt, betrayed part that had spent 2 years wondering why I wasn't enough, felt a grim sense of satisfaction. There is a specific kind of catharsis in seeing a liar caught in the bright lights of public scrutiny. But as the night wore on, that satisfaction began to curdle into something else. I saw strangers, women I had never met, joining the fray, shaming him, calling him a narcissist, a sociopath, a coward. The story was no longer about a proposal. It was about a betrayal. And even though I was the victim of that betrayal, I felt exposed. My private pain, the most intimate trauma of my life, was now being dissected by thousands of strangers in a Facebook comment section. I felt like I was standing naked in the middle of that airport right alongside them while the whole world watched and took notes. I tried to close the app. I told myself I wouldn't look again, but the curiosity, the sheer magnetic pull of the chaos kept drawing me back. I needed to know if he would respond. I needed to know if she would see it. Did his new fiancée know? Was she another victim in this, or was she the one he was calling from our bed while I was in the shower? The math was the hardest part to swallow. I sat there in the dark, the only light in the room coming from the blue glow of my phone, and I started tracing back the months like a detective at a crime scene. 3 years. If they had been together for 3 years, that meant their anniversary was somewhere in the middle of my 4th year with him. I started scrolling back through my own digital history, my thumb trembling as I looked at photos from 2 years ago. There was a picture of us at a friend's wedding in the fall of 2022. He had his arm around me, whispering something in my ear that made me laugh. I remembered that night vividly. I had felt so secure, so loved. But according to the timeline he'd just given a news crew, he was already 6 months into a relationship with this other woman. I looked at his face in the photo, searching for a tell, a flicker of guilt, a sign of the monster lurking beneath the surface of my perfect boyfriend. There was nothing. He looked completely present. He looked like the man I thought I was going to marry. Then I found the work trip photos, October 2022. He told me he had to go to Seattle for a conference. I remember helping him pick out his ties. I remember driving him to the airport and kissing him goodbye at the curb, telling him to text me as soon as he landed. He did text me. He texted me every night he was gone. "Wish you were here," he'd say. "Bed feels empty without you." Now I realized the bed wasn't empty. It was probably occupied by the woman I just saw in that video. Every "I love you" he sent over those 12 months was a calculated move to keep me complacent while he built a life with someone else. The sheer logistics of it made my head spin. How do you maintain 2 separate lives for a full year without slipping up? How do you remember which stories you told to which person? I felt a sudden sharp pang of retroactive gaslighting. I remembered times I had questioned him, little things like a receipt for a restaurant I didn't recognize or a shirt I hadn't seen before, and he had laughed it off, making me feel like I was being crazy or insecure. He hadn't just cheated. He had systematically dismantled my sense of reality. He had Truman Show-ed me, making me the unwitting star of a play where I was the only one who didn't know the script. By midnight, the news station's post had thousands of shares. My friends weren't backing down. Sarah was leading the charge, her comments getting hundreds of likes as she posted more and more receipts. She even tagged some of our mutual friends who started adding their own testimonies. "I saw them together at the park in June 2023, one wrote. "He told me they were moving in together soon. I had no idea he was still with her." The comment section was becoming a digital battlefield. On one side, there were the romantics, who were still defending the couple, telling my friends to mind their own business and let them be happy. On the other side was an army of women who had been cheated on, who recognized the pattern and who were out for blood. They were calling him a predator, a serial liar, and a sociopath. I watched the notifications roll in, feeling a bizarre, sickening mix of emotions. There was a dark, jagged part of me that felt a rush of vindication. For 2 years, I had carried the weight of the breakup as if it were my failure. I had spent countless hours in therapy wondering what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough to make him stay, why he suddenly lost the spark. Seeing him publicly exposed felt like the universe finally stepping in to set the record straight. It was like a giant hand had reached down and flipped the lights on, revealing the cockroach for what he really was. But as the hours ticked by, the satisfaction began to be replaced by a crushing sense of anxiety. This wasn't just happening to him, it was happening to me. My name was being dragged into the light. People were asking who the other woman, the original girlfriend, was. I saw strangers speculating about my appearance, my personality, and why he would have cheated on me. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. I decided to close the apps. I deleted Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok from my phone in one frantic motion. I couldn't look anymore. I needed the world to go quiet. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, staring at myself in the mirror. I looked pale, my eyes red-rimmed and hollow. I looked like someone who had just survived a car wreck, and in a way I had. The collision had happened 2 years ago, but I was only just now seeing the wreckage. I crawled into bed, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the airport. I saw the lilies. I heard the news anchor's cheerful voice announcing the 3-year anniversary. My mind kept going back to her, the fiancée. Did she know? Had he lied to her the same way he lied to me? Or was she in on it from the beginning? If she had been with him for 3 years, she must have known about me for at least the first year. Or perhaps he told her we were just roommates, or that I was a crazy ex he was trying to get away from. The thought of her being a victim too was almost harder to bear than the thought of her being a villain. If he could do this to me after 5 years, what was he going to do to her? He was starting a marriage on a foundation of lies and public scandal. Was she sitting in her house right now watching the comments pile up her fairy tale, dissolving into a nightmare? I felt a sudden intense urge to reach out to the news station. I wanted to tell them to take it down. Not for him, he deserved every bit of the fallout, but for my own sanity. I didn't want my life to be a cautionary tale for the evening news. I wanted to go back to being the 35-year-old woman who had healed, who was at peace, who was moving forward. But then another thought crept in. Why should I protect him? Why should I go out of my way to clean up the mess he made? He was the one who agreed to the interview. He was the one who invited the cameras into his romantic moment. He was the one who gave them the timeline thinking he was safe because it had been 2 years since he'd discarded me. He had gambled on my silence and my disappearance, and he had lost. I rolled over and stared at the wall. The silence of my apartment, which I usually loved, now felt heavy and suffocating. I felt paranoid. If he saw the comments, would he blame me? Would he show up at my door demanding I tell my friends to stop? He knew where I lived. He still had a key for 6 months after we broke up until I finally changed the locks. The fear started to take root. A man who can lead a double life for a year is a man you don't truly know. He was a stranger to me now, a dangerous one. I reached out and made sure my front door was double locked. I checked the windows. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, all because of a 30-second video clip that was meant to be a celebration of love. The irony was bitter. I had spent 2 years trying to forget him, and now he was everywhere. He was on my phone, he was in my head, and he was the main topic of conversation in my social circle. I felt like the progress I had made, the self-love, the confidence, the trust I had slowly started to build in others was being stripped away, leaving me raw and exposed. The morning after the video went viral, the sun rose with a cruel, indifferent brightness. I woke up with a start, my heart racing before my eyes even opened. That split second of peace you get upon waking instantly, shattered by the memory of the night before. Usually I love the way the morning light filters through my bedroom curtains, but today it felt intrusive, like a searchlight exposing a crime scene. I lay there for a long time staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom weight of those 3 years pressing down on my chest. 3 years. The number kept looping in my brain like a broken record. If he had been with her for 3 years and we had broken up 2 years ago, then the math was a jagged blade that cut through every memory I had of our final year together. I started mentally flipping through a calendar that no longer existed, recontextualizing every moment. I remembered my 34th birthday. He had taken me out to a quiet, expensive dinner. He had held my hand across the table, looked me in the eye, and told me he couldn't imagine his life without me. I remember feeling so lucky, so cherished. Now I realize that while he was toasting to our future, he probably had a gift for her hidden in the trunk of his car. I remembered the way he would kiss my forehead before leaving for those early morning meetings. Was he going to a meeting, or was he going to her house to have breakfast? Did he use the same pet names for both of us? Did he tell her the same stories about his childhood, his dreams, his fears? The betrayal felt retroactively invasive. It wasn't just that he had cheated, it was that he had stolen my reality. He had allowed me to live in a world that didn't exist, making me a secondary character in a story I thought I was the lead in. I felt a sudden visceral need to scrub my skin to wash away the traces of a man who had been a stranger even while he was sleeping next to me. I reached for my phone, instinctively wanting to check the comments again, but then I remembered I had deleted the apps. My hand hovered over the empty space on the screen where the icons used to be. The silence was deafening. I felt like I was in a sensory deprivation tank while a storm raged just outside the walls. My landline, which I almost never use, rang, startling me so much I nearly dropped the phone. It was Sarah. I picked up, my voice sounding raspy and thin, even to my own ears. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately, her voice vibrating with a mixture of concern and adrenaline. "I've been checking the post every 20 minutes. The news station still hasn't taken it down, but the comments are insane, honey. People are tagging local news competitors. Someone even found his LinkedIn and is tagging his company. They're saying a man with this little integrity shouldn't be in a leadership position." "Sarah, stop," I whispered, closing my eyes. "Please, I can't hear this." I know, she said, softening her tone. "But you have to understand, we're all so angry for you. We watched you fall apart 2 years ago. We watched you blame yourself. To see him standing there acting like some romantic hero on the news, it's more than we can stand. He's a liar, and now the whole world knows it. But I'm the one who has to live with it," I said, a tear finally escaping and rolling down my cheek. "The whole world knows I was the woman who got played for a year. I'm the girl in the before photo that people are pitying. I don't want pity, Sarah. I just wanted my peace." "He took your peace the moment he stepped in front of those cameras," she countered. "He chose to make his life public. He chose to give them that 3-year timeline. He thought he could rewrite history, and that you'd just stay in the past where he left you. He didn't count on us." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right about one thing: he had invited this. He wasn't some private citizen caught in a scandal. He had sought out the spotlight. He had agreed to the interview, probably thinking it would make him look like a man of commitment and grand gestures. He had gambled on my silence, assuming that after 2 years, I would be too far away to notice or too classy to say anything. I thought about the evidence I had. I still had the emails from January 2024, the long rambling messages, where he talked about how hard the breakup was for him, how he needed time to heal, and how he would always care for me. I had photos of us from that final New Year's Eve laughing together as the ball dropped. I had the lease agreement we both signed for the apartment we shared until the very end. I found myself opening my laptop and navigating to the news station's website. I looked for a contact form. Part of me wanted to send them every single screenshot. I wanted to see the look on the news anchor's face when they realized their feel-good story was actually a profile of a pathological liar. I wanted the retraction. I wanted a public apology. But as my fingers hovered over the keyboard, I stopped. If I did that, I would be jumping into the fire. I would be making myself a permanent part of the narrative. Right now, it was my friends doing the talking. If I stepped forward, it became my battle. And I was so tired of fighting for a man who had never been worth the effort. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee, the familiar movements providing a small sense of grounding. As the smell of roasted beans filled the air, I looked out the window at the street below. Life was moving on for everyone else. People were walking their dogs, driving to work, oblivious to the digital execution happening on their screens. I envied them. I envied their anonymity. I realized that my biggest fear wasn't just the public humiliation. It was the loss of trust. How do I ever look at another man and believe a word he says? If someone can lie to your face for a year, not just about a one-night stand, but about an entire secondary life, then words have no meaning. I love you becomes just a sequence of sounds. I'll be home late becomes a riddle. I felt like I was looking at the world through a cracked lens. Every happy couple I saw on the street now looked like a potential lie. I wondered how many of them were living in their own Truman Show, playing a part they didn't know was scripted. It felt like my heart had been hardened, turned into something cold and defensive to protect itself from further damage. I spent the rest of the morning wandering through my apartment, touching the things that made me happy. My books, my plants, the art I'd bought since he left. These were things he hadn't touched. These were things that were mine. I tried to focus on the life I had built without him, a life that was honest and real. But the what-ifs kept creeping in. What if he sees the comments and thinks I'm the one behind it? What if he tries to contact me? I checked my blocked list on my phone. His name was there, a silent reminder of the wall I had built. I checked my email filters. He was blocked there too. I had done everything right. I had followed all the rules of moving on. And yet here he was crashing back into my life like a wrecking ball. I thought about the fiancée again. I wondered if she was seeing the same comments I was. If she was, her world must be imploding. There is no way to unsee that kind of information. Once the seed of doubt is planted, it grows like a weed choking out everything else. I wondered if she was looking at him right now, asking the same questions I was asking the air. Who are you? Have I ever really known you? Lee? In a strange way, I felt a bond with her. We were two sides of the same coin, both deceived by the same man, both part of a timeline that shouldn't have overlapped. He had played us both using our trust as a playground for his ego. By the time Wednesday afternoon rolled around, the silence I had tried to create by deleting my apps felt more like a vacuum. It was a pressurized space where my own thoughts were the only sounds, and they were deafening. I found myself sitting on my balcony, staring out at the city, wondering how many people walking by had seen my face, or at least the version of my life that was currently being dissected online. I felt like a ghost haunting my own narrative. The edit I had mentally made to my life, the one where I was healed and moving on, felt like it had been deleted by a malicious software update. Every time I caught my reflection in a window or a mirror, I didn't see the confident 35-year-old woman I had worked so hard to become. I saw the girl who didn't know. I saw the girl who had been laughed at behind her back for an entire year. That's the thing about a betrayal of this magnitude. It doesn't just hurt your heart, it insults your intelligence. It makes you look back at every smile, every I love you, every quiet moment on the couch, and realize you were the only one actually there. He was somewhere else even when he was holding my hand. I kept thinking about the news station. I could see the logo in my mind, the bright blue and gold of the local affiliate. I wondered what the producers were thinking right now. Were they huddled in a meeting staring at the thousands of comments calling their Love Takes Flight segment a sham? Did they feel responsible, or were they secretly thrilled by the engagement numbers? In the world of modern media, a scandal is often more valuable than a feel-good story. My pain was their traffic. I had the evidence. That was the thought that kept circling my mind like a shark. I had the digital receipts that proved we were together until January 2024. I had the text messages from last Christmas where he told me I was the only woman he ever wanted to build a life with. If I sent those to the news station, they would have no choice but to retract the story. They would have to acknowledge that their 3-year timeline was a lie. But at what cost? To get that retraction, I would have to hand over my private life to a newsroom of strangers. I would have to become a source. I would have to relive every text, every photo, every agonizing detail of our final months just to prove I wasn't crazy. And for what? To humiliate him further, he was already being dragged through the mud by a digital mob. Would a formal retraction actually give me peace, or would it just keep me tied to him for another week, another month? I thought about the work trips again. That last year he had been traveling to Denver almost every other week. He told me his company was opening a new branch there, and he was the only one they trusted to oversee the transition. I remembered how proud I was of him. I remembered making him his favorite lasagna on the nights he came back, listening to him complain about the long hours and the boring hotel rooms. Now I realized those hotel rooms weren't boring. They weren't even hotel rooms. He was probably at her house. He was probably sitting at her dinner table, eating a meal she had made, telling her about his crazy job back home that kept him away so much. We were both being managed. We were both being curated. He wasn't a partner. He was a project manager of two separate lives, and he had been incredibly efficient at it. The paranoia started to set in around dinner time. I found myself checking the locks on the front door for the third time. He had been a calm man mostly, but I didn't know who this version of him was. A man who can maintain a life for a year is a man capable of anything. If his life was being ruined, his reputation, his job, his new engagement, would he blame me? Would he see my friends' comments and assume I was the puppet master behind the curtain? I haven't reached out to him. I blocked him on everything the day we broke up, and I haven't unblocked him once. But blocking someone digitally doesn't stop them from showing up physically. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine as I looked at the dark hallway of my apartment. I realized I was afraid of the man I had once thought was my safest place in the world. I decided to text Sarah. I needed a voice of reason that wasn't my own internal screaming. Do you think I should ask the news station to take it down? I messaged her. Her reply was almost instant. Why let him burn? He's the one who lied to them. If they take it down, it's like it never happened. He gets to keep his perfect image. The comments are the only thing holding him accountable right now. But it's overwhelming me. I type back, my thumbs shaking. Every time I see a new account posting about it, I feel like I'm back in 2024. I feel like I'm losing all the progress I made. Then don't look, she replied. Delete the apps. Stay offline for a few days. Let the internet do its thing. It'll fizzle out eventually, but he'll have to live with the fact that his romantic proposal is forever tainted. You didn't do this to him, honey. He did this to himself. I took her advice. I went through my phone and deleted the social media apps again. I had reinstalled them in a moment of weakness, but Sarah was right. It wasn't healthy. Seeing a stranger from 3 states away call my ex a narcissistic pig felt good for 5 seconds, but the hollow ache that followed lasted for hours. I tried to focus on the concept of fizzling out. That was the goal, to let the fire burn through the oxygen until there was nothing left but ash. But as I sat in my quiet living room, I realized that even if the internet forgot by next week, I wouldn't. This wasn't a trending topic for me. This was my life. This was the 5 years I spent thinking I was building a foundation, only to find out I was standing on a trapdoor. I began to wonder about the why. Not the how, the logistics were clear now, but the why. Why stay with me for that final year? If he had found someone else, someone he was ready to propose to, why not just leave? Why keep coming home to me? Was it cowardice? Was he waiting for the perfect moment to exit? Or did he actually think he could have both? Some men have an insatiable need to be loved from all sides, a void that one person can never fill. I had been the stability, the history, the home. She had been the newness, the excitement, the future. And he had been the thief stealing time from both of us. The anger was starting to replace the shock. It was a slow-burning, righteous heat that made my skin feel too tight. I thought about all the times I had apologized for things I didn't do just to keep the peace during that final year. I thought about the times I had felt needy because I wanted him to stay home for one weekend instead of flying off to work. I wasn't needy. I was being starved of the truth. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 11 p.m. I knew I wouldn't sleep. The Truman Show feeling was at its peak. I felt like I was waiting for the director to call cut for the walls of my apartment to fall away and reveal a studio audience. I wanted someone to tell me this was all a prank, a social experiment, anything other than the reality that the man I loved was a professional-grade liar. I had evidence. I had January 2024. I had the truth. And as I lay in bed staring at the shadows on the wall, I had to decide if the truth was a shield I wanted to hide behind or a weapon I was finally ready to use. The evidence was sitting in a dusty folder on my laptop, a digital graveyard I hadn't touched in 18 months. I opened it with a shaking hand. There they were, photos, plane tickets, and a spreadsheet we'd used to track our shared expenses until the very week he moved out in January 2024. I stared at a photo of us from October 2023. We were at a pumpkin patch, both of us wearing matching flannel shirts, his arm draped around my shoulder, pulling me close against the autumn chill. We looked like the definition of a happy long-term couple. But if he had been with her for 3 years, he had likely taken her to a pumpkin patch that same week. He might have even worn the same flannel. The sickness in my stomach intensified. I began to realize that for an entire year, I wasn't just being cheated on. I was being used as a prop to maintain his image of stability while he auditioned my replacement. I felt like I was looking at a map of a city I thought I knew, only to realize all the landmarks were fake. Every "I'm so tired from this project" was a lie. Every "I'm just in a weird headspace lately" was a lie. He wasn't in a weird headspace, he was in a whole other relationship. The question of whether or not a news station could retract a post began to consume me. I found myself Googling how to get a news story removed, and legal rights to privacy and viral videos. I wasn't a lawyer, but I had the truth, and the truth was that the story they were telling was factually incorrect. They were presenting a romantic milestone built on a foundation of deception. I wondered if they would even care. In the era of clicks, does the truth actually matter, or is a good story enough? I sat at my desk drafting an email to the news station in my head. "Dear news team, the man in your romantic airport proposal video was living with me until January of this year. The 3-year timeline he gave you is a lie. Here are the photos to prove it." I wrote it out, then deleted it. I wrote it again, then closed the laptop. There was a terrifying power in that email. If I sent it, I was essentially detonating a bomb in his life. I was taking the public shaming that my friends had started and giving it the stamp of official truth. There was a dark part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, that wanted to hit send. I wanted to see the news station issue a correction. I wanted to see the "Love Takes Flight" headline replaced with something like "Local man caught in elaborate double life." I wanted him to feel the weight of his own actions. I felt a surge of that satisfaction I'd mentioned to my friends. It was a jagged, ugly kind of joy, the kind you feel when you see a villain in a movie finally get what's coming to them. But then the other side of me would take over the side that just wanted to be at peace. If I sent that email, I was inviting the news station to interview me. I was inviting more comments, more scrutiny, more chaos. I was letting him rent space in my head again, and he had already stayed there far too long without paying rent. I was 35 years old. I was supposed to be past this. I was supposed to be at a point in my life where I didn't care what an ex-boyfriend was doing. The paranoia was the worst part. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from a friend saying, "Did you see the latest comment?" or someone just posted a screenshot of his old Tinder profile, I felt my heart rate spike. I was terrified he would think I was the one coordinating this. I could see him sitting in his apartment, the one he probably shared with her, now scrolling through the vitriol, his face turning red with rage. I knew his temper. He wasn't a violent man, but he was a man who hated to be embarrassed. He was a man who valued his reputation above all else. And right now, his reputation was being shredded in a public forum. I began to worry about retaliation. What if he tried to leak things about me? What if he showed up at my work? The sense of safety I had spent 2 years building felt like a house of cards in a hurricane. I realized that the Truman Show feeling wasn't just about the past, it was about the present. I felt like people were watching me, waiting to see how I would react. I felt like I was on a stage and the audience was waiting for me to scream or cry or fight back. I started to think about the other women in the comment section. There were so many of them. Women I didn't know sharing their own stories of being the other woman or the ex who was cheated on. They were using my story as a mirror for their own pain. In a way, it was beautiful, a community of strangers standing up for a woman they'd never met. But in another way, it was suffocating. I didn't want to be the patron saint of the betrayed. I didn't want my identity to be defined by what he did to me. I looked at the 3-year girl, again the fiancé. I couldn't stop looking at her face in the video. She looked so genuinely happy. She looked the way I had looked at the pumpkin patch. I felt a wave of pity for her that was almost as strong as my anger at him. She was walking into a marriage with a man who had lied about the very beginning of their story. Every anniversary they celebrated would be based on a lie. Every "I've been loyal to you from day one" would be a lie. She was building a house on a sinkhole and she had no idea. Should I tell her? That was the thought that kept me up until 3 a.m. If I were her, would I want to know? If I were standing on the edge of forever with a man who had spent the first year of our relationship in another woman's bed, would I want someone to pull me back? Or would I want to stay in the dream? The truth is a heavy gift to give a stranger. It can save them, but it can also destroy them. I realized then that this was why the situation felt so overwhelming. It wasn't just about the cheating, it was about the responsibility of the truth. I held the keys to his undoing in my hands, and I had to decide if I was the kind of person who turned them. I felt a profound sense of loss for the woman I was a week ago, the woman who didn't have this choice to make. I missed the peace of my ignorance. I reached out to the news station's general inquiry line, not to send the evidence, but just to ask a hypothetical question. What is your policy on removing social media posts if the information provided by the subjects is found to be false? I didn't use my real name. I just wanted to see what was possible. I needed to know if I had any control over the narrative or if I was just a passenger on a ship that was already sinking. The response from the news station's general inquiry line came back faster than I expected, a sterile, automated sounding reply that did little to calm my nerves. It basically said that they stand by their reporting based on the information provided by the participants at the time of filming, and unless there was a legal mandate or a significant threat to public safety, they rarely retracted human interest pieces. It was a polite way of saying, we got our clicks, and your personal drama isn't our problem. I sat in my darkened kitchen, the glow of my laptop reflecting in the window, and felt a wave of cold reality wash over me. To To them, this was a 30-second clip of a man kneeling in an airport. To the internet, it was a juicy piece of gossip to be consumed and discarded by next Tuesday. But to me, it was the final ugly chapter of a 5-year investment that had turned out to be a Ponzi scheme of the heart. I couldn't stop thinking about those work trips to Denver. Now that I knew the truth, the memories felt like they were being rewritten in real time. I remembered the last trip he took just weeks before he broke up with me in January. I had packed his favorite navy blazer, the one he said made him feel confident for presentations. I had tucked a little note in his pocket that said, "Good luck, I'm so proud of you." I felt a physical ache in my chest thinking about that note. Did he find it while he was with her? Did he laugh, or did he just crumple it up and throw it in a trash can at the airport before she picked him up? The thought of him transitioning from devoted boyfriend to passionate fiancé in the span of a 2-hour flight was nauseating. He was a chameleon, changing his colors to match whichever woman was in front of him. The Truman Show feeling wasn't just a metaphor anymore, it was a diagnosis. I felt like every memory I owned was a fake set, every conversation we'd had was a scripted line. I remembered a night in late 2023 when we sat on the balcony and talked about where we wanted to be in 5 years. He had talked about buying a house with a big garden, maybe a golden retriever. I had seen myself in that future, but now I realized that when he said "we," he wasn't talking about me. He was practicing his lines for the life he was already building with her. My phone, even without the social media apps, was a constant source of stress. My friends were still texting me updates, unable to help themselves. Sarah sent me a screenshot of a comment from a woman who claimed to be the fiancé's cousin. The cousin was defending them, saying that people don't know the whole story and that Mark was unhappy for years. Unhappy for years. The gall of it made me want to scream. If he was so unhappy, why did he stay? Why did he keep telling me I was his soulmate? Why did he let me support him through his promotion? The narrative was already shifting. He was the unhappy man who finally found true love, and I was the burden he had to shed to get there. It's a classic story, one that cheaters tell themselves so they can sleep at night. They turn the person they betrayed into the villain so they can be the hero of their new life. I spent Thursday morning in a daze. I tried to do laundry, but I ended up just staring at a basket of clothes for 20 minutes. I tried to answer work emails, but the words on the screen looked like gibberish. Every time a car pulled into the driveway of my apartment complex, I went to the window and peeked through the blinds. The paranoia was starting to eat me alive. I kept imagining him seeing the comments and losing his mind. He was a man who cared deeply about how people perceived him. He wanted to be the good guy, the success story, the romantic lead. Having his secrets aired out by hundreds of strangers was his worst nightmare. I was terrified that he would reach out, not to apologize, but to blame me for ruining his big moment. I looked at my evidence again. January 2024, that was the date on the last photo I had of us together. We were at a friend's New Year's Eve party. He was kissing me as the clock struck midnight. He looked so happy. He looked so sincere. I realized then that the most terrifying thing about him wasn't that he was a liar, it was that he was a good one. He could simulate love so perfectly that even he probably believed it in the moment. I found myself wondering about her, the fiancé. If they had been dating for 3 years, she must have been through so much with him while I was still in the picture. Did she ever suspect? Did he tell her he was breaking up with his ex soon? Or did he tell her I was just a roommate or a cousin? The possibilities were endless, and each one was more degrading than the last. I felt a sudden sharp urge to protect her, not because I liked her, I didn't even know her, but because I knew what it was like to be under his spell. I knew the warmth of his attention and the chilling cold when he withdrew it. I knew how he could make you feel like the only person in the world while he was looking over your shoulder for someone better. But I also knew that if I reached out, I would be the crazy ex. He had likely already spent the last 2 years poisoning her mind against me. He probably told her I was obsessive or unable to move on. If I showed up with my January 2024 receipts, I wouldn't look like a savior. I would look like a saboteur. By Thursday evening, the rain had started a slow gray drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. I sat on my couch with a blanket pulled up to my chin, watching the raindrops race down the glass. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion. Not the kind you can sleep off, but a soul-deep weariness that comes from having your reality shattered twice by the same person. I thought about the news station again. I thought about the thousands of people who had watched that video. Most of them had probably already forgotten it. They had moved on to the next viral clip, the next outrage, the next wholesome moment. But for me, the damage was permanent. I was the collateral damage of a feel-good story. I realized that I couldn't control the news station. I couldn't control the comment section. I couldn't even control my friends who were acting out of a misplaced sense of loyalty. The only thing I could control was my own reaction. But how do you stay calm when your past has been stolen and your present is being turned into a circus? I took a deep breath and looked around my apartment. I had worked so hard to make this place a sanctuary. I had bought the velvet couch he would have hated. I had hung the abstract art he would have called weird. I had filled the shelves with books he never would have read. This was my life. It was honest, and it was real, and it was mine. But as I looked at the door, I felt the familiar prickle of fear. He knew where I lived. He knew my patterns, and if he was as desperate to save his reputation as I thought he was, he wouldn't stay silent for long. I felt like I was waiting for a storm to break, and I didn't know if my sanctuary was strong enough to hold. Friday morning arrived with a heavy, oppressive stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours, my mind a frantic carousel of images from that airport video spliced with memories of my own life. I felt physically sick, a knot in my stomach that wouldn't untie no matter how much peppermint tea I drank. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ticker tape on the news broadcast 3 years together. It was the sentence that effectively deleted a year of my existence. It made me a ghost in my own history. I finally sat down at my kitchen table, my laptop open to the folder of photos from January 2024. I looked at the metadata, the digital fingerprints that proved where and when these moments happened. January 12th, 2024. A photo of us at a local bistro celebrating his promotion. He was smiling, his hand over mine. He looked so proud, so present. According to the news story, he was 2 years into a relationship with his fiancée at that exact moment. He had likely left that dinner, walked me to my car, kissed me goodnight, and then texted her from the driveway. I remember the breakup so clearly now, and the memory is coated in a layer of fresh stinging poison. It was late January, just a few weeks after that photo was taken. He came over to my place, the place we had shared for years before he needed space, and moved into a bachelor pad to find himself. He sat on my velvet couch, the one he always said was too soft, and he looked at the floor. He told me he was broken. He told me he felt like he was failing me, because he couldn't give me the commitment I deserved. He cried. He actually cried into his hands, telling me that I was too good for him, and that he needed to be alone to fix whatever was wrong in his head. I had spent months after that day feeling sorry for him. I had blamed myself for being too much, for wanting a future he wasn't ready for. I felt like a failure for not being able to fix him. But now looking at that airport video, I realized the work he needed to do on himself was actually just moving the rest of his boxes into her house. The commitment he couldn't give me wasn't because he wasn't ready. It was because he had already given it to someone else. He had used my empathy as a weapon against me, gaslighting me into believing he was a tragic figure when he was really just a coward. The news station's refusal to engage with my inquiry felt like a second abandonment. I understood their position from a business standpoint. They had a viral hit on their hands, but the human cost was staggering. They were essentially hosting a monument to a lie. Every time someone shared that video, they were reinforcing a version of reality that was built on my erasure. I felt like I was being written out of the book of my own life, replaced by a younger, shinier version of a happy ending. I found myself back on the news station's Facebook page despite my promise to stay away. The comment section had devolved into total anarchy. My friends were still there like a digital Praetorian guard, but they were being joined by strangers who had done their own digging. People had found his Instagram, the one he had blocked me on 2 years ago, and were posting screenshots of his post with her that overlapped with our time together. Look at this, one commenter wrote, posting a picture of him and the fiancée at a beach in July 2023. He was with her in Malibu while his ex was posting about their 5-year anniversary back home. This guy is a pro. The satisfaction I had felt earlier was completely gone, replaced by a cold, prickling fear. I looked at the comments and saw his full name being tagged over and over. People were calling for him to be fired. People were calling him names I wouldn't even say out loud. And while he deserved the truth to come out, this wasn't just the truth anymore. It was a digital lynch mob, and I was the one who had accidentally handed them the rope. I started to worry that he would think I was the one who had orchestrated the whole thing. He knew my friends. He knew how loyal Sarah was. He would see her name at the top of the comment thread and assume I was sitting in my apartment, directing the attack like a general. I felt a surge of panic. He had always been so careful about his image. If he felt cornered, if he felt like I was the reason his perfect life was collapsing, what would he do? He hadn't been a violent man in the 5 years I knew him, but I realized with a jolt of terror that I didn't actually know him at all. The man I knew didn't lead a double life for a year. The man I knew didn't propose to a woman on the news using a timeline that erased his previous partner. I was dealing with a stranger, a man who is capable of deep, sustained deception. A man like that is unpredictable when he's desperate. I went around my apartment and checked the locks again. I felt like a prisoner. I was 35 years old, a successful woman with a career and a life I loved, and I was hiding in my own home because an ex-boyfriend had gone viral for a lie. The unfairness of it made me want to scream. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't posted the video. I hadn't even known he was engaged until a friend sent me the link. I was just a bystander who had been caught in the blast radius of his ego. I thought about the fiancée again. Her name was Maya, according to one of the comments. I wondered if she was sitting in her own kitchen watching her fairy tale burn. If they had been together for 3 years, she must have seen signs. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe he was just that good. Maybe he told her that I was the one who wouldn't let go. Maybe he told her that we were just friends, or that I was unstable. I felt a sudden bizarre urge to apologize to her, not because I had done anything wrong, but because we were both part of the same tragedy. We were both victims of a man who didn't know how to be honest, but I knew that reaching out would be a mistake. It would only feed the fire. It would give him more ammunition to use against me. See, he would tell her, I told you she was obsessed with me. Look at her trying to ruin our happiness. The Truman Show feeling intensified as the day went on. I felt like I was being watched by the thousands of people in that comment section. I felt like I had to perform the victim correctly. If I was too angry, I was the scorned ex. If I was too quiet, I was weak. There was no winning. There was no way to get through this without being judged by people who didn't know the first thing about the 5 years I had spent loving that man. I finally reached out to Sarah and asked her to stop. Please, I texted her. I know you're trying to help, but this is making it worse. I'm scared, Sarah. I'm scared of what he'll do if this keeps going. Just let it go, please. Her response was slow to come. I'm sorry. She finally wrote, I just hate that he's getting away with it. I hate that everyone thinks he's this amazing guy when he's actually a monster. But if it's making you feel unsafe, I'll stop. I'll tell the others to back off. But the internet doesn't back off. Once a story like this starts, it has a life of its own. My friends could stop commenting, but the thousands of strangers who had already seen the tea wouldn't. The genie was out of the bottle, and no amount of wishing was going to put it back in. I was stuck in a viral loop of my own trauma, and I had no idea how to break free. I spent the evening sitting in the dark, watching the headlights of cars pass by outside. I felt a profound sense of isolation. Even with my friends trying to protect me, I was ultimately alone in this. I was the only one who knew the weight of those 5 years. I was the only one who knew the sound of his voice when he promised me he'd never leave. And I was the only one who had to live with the knowledge that it had all been a performance. By Friday night, the rain had turned into a steady, rhythmic drumming against my windows, a sound that usually lulled me into a sense of safety but now felt like a countdown. I sat in my darkened living room, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long skeletal shadows of the trees across my floor. I had spent the last few hours doing something I promised myself I wouldn't do. I was looking at the logistics of his lie. Not the emotions, not the heartbreak, just the cold hard mechanics of how a human being manages to be in two places at once for 365 days. I started thinking about the small things, the mundane details that make up a shared life. I thought about his phone charger. Did he have a spare at her house? Did he have a separate set of toiletries tucked away in her bathroom cabinet? When he told me he was going to the gym, was he actually driving to her place for a quick hour of domestic bliss before coming home to eat the dinner I had made? The sheer level of coordination required to pull this off was staggering. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment, it was a full-time job. He had been a project manager of infidelity, and I had been his most successful project. I remembered a specific night in November. He had come home late smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, something floral and heavy. At the time, I had mentioned it and he didn't even blink. He laughed and said he'd been stuck in an elevator with a woman who must have bathed in the stuff. I believed him. I actually felt bad for him for having to endure a smelly elevator. Looking back, that memory feels like a physical sting. He had stood in our kitchen, kissed my cheek, and lied with the ease of someone breathing. He wasn't just cheating, he was practicing. Every small lie he told me was a rehearsal for the big one he was currently telling the world on the news. I finally dared to open my laptop and look at the January 2024 folder one more time. There was a video I had forgotten about. It was only 10 seconds long, taken on my phone, while we were walking through a park on a crisp, sunny Saturday morning. He was jogging ahead of me, then turned around to make a goofy face at the camera. He looked so happy. He looked so unburdened. This was less than a month before he would walk out of my life forever. According to his 3-year narrative, he had been with Maya for 2 years at that point. I watched the video over and over, searching for a crack in the mask. How could a man look that carefree while carrying a secret that would eventually destroy 2 women's lives? There was no guilt in his eyes. There was no hesitation in his smile. It was the face of a man who had completely compartmentalized his soul. He had lived in a world where I existed on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and she existed on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Sundays, I suppose, were for whoever he was most afraid of losing that week. The news station's silence on the matter felt like a heavy, wet blanket over my head. I realized that to them, the truth was whatever made for a better headline. A man proposing at an airport is a story. A man being exposed as a serial cheater who led a double life for a year is a private matter. They didn't want to retract the post because the post was working for them. It was generating thousands of comments, thousands of shares, and thousands of views. My trauma was their engagement goldmine. I felt a sudden sharp pang of regret for my friends' actions. I knew they meant well. I knew Sarah was just trying to protect me in the only way she knew how, by being loud and fierce and uncompromising. But their comments had turned my private grief into a public spectator sport. Now, when people looked at that video, they weren't just seeing a proposal, they were seeing a scandal. And because I was the other woman in that equation, the one he left behind, I was part of the gossip. I was the person people were so sorry for, and that pity felt more degrading than the betrayal itself. Around 10 o'clock p.m., a car pulled into the guest parking spot directly in front of my balcony. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't recognize the car. It was a dark SUV I hadn't seen before. I stood perfectly still behind the curtain, my breath hitching in my throat. Was it him? Had he borrowed a car? Was he coming here to demand I tell my friends to shut up? I realized in that moment that I was genuinely afraid of the man I had lived with for 5 years. Not because of what he might do physically, but because of the psychological warfare he was capable of. A man who can lie for a year is a man who can convince himself that he is the victim. The car sat there for 5 minutes, its headlights cutting through the rain before the driver finally turned them off. A woman got out one of my neighbors I barely knew and hurried inside with a bag of groceries. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and slumped against the wall. I was becoming a prisoner of my own paranoia. The Truman Show wasn't just a movie anymore, it was the reality of my daily life. I felt like the world was closing in on me and there was nowhere left to hide. I thought about Maya the fiancé. I wondered if she had a January 2024 folder of her own. I wondered if she had a video of him from that same week looking just as happy, just as sincere, just as in love. The thought that he could offer the same version of himself to two different people at the same time was the most chilling part of all. It meant that his love wasn't a connection to another person. It was just a performance he put on for whoever was watching. He didn't love me, and he didn't love her. He loved the way he felt when he was being adored. I went to my desk and pulled out a notebook. I needed to do something with my hands that wasn't scrolling or clicking. I started writing a letter to him, one I knew I would never send. Dear Mark, I wrote the ink bleeding slightly on the page. You didn't just break my heart, you broke my memory. You took 5 years of my life and turned them into a hallucination. You let me believe in a version of us that never existed, and you let me walk away believing I was the reason it failed. I wrote for an hour, filling page after page with the things I had been too shocked to say when we broke up. I wrote about the airport video, the Lily's the 3-year lie. I wrote about the fear I felt every time a car pulled into my driveway. By the time I was finished, my hand was cramping and the paper was tear-stained, but I felt a tiny microscopic shift in my chest. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a wild, uncontrollable fire. It was becoming something cooler, something I could handle. I realized then that I didn't need the news station to retract the post. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't even need the internet to stop talking. What I needed was to reclaim the truth for myself. He could lie to the cameras, he could lie to his fiancée, and he could lie to the thousands of strangers in the comment section, but he couldn't lie to the data. He couldn't lie to the photos in my January 2024 folder. He couldn't lie to the 5 years of my life that were real, even if he was a fake. I closed my notebook and looked out at the rain. I felt a strange sense of clarity. The Truman Show ends when the protagonist decides to stop playing the part. I was done being the victim. I was done being the scorned ex in someone else's viral drama. I was 35 years old and I was going to stop looking for answers in a comment section that didn't know my name. Saturday morning arrived with a strange, hollowed out kind of clarity. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world smelling of damp earth and fresh starts, though my own world still felt like it was covered in a layer of grime. I woke up, and for the first time in 4 days, I didn't reach for my phone immediately. I let it sit on the nightstand, a silent black mirrored brick that held the potential to ruin my day. I stayed under the covers, listening to the muffled sounds of the city, waking up a distant siren, a neighbor's car door slamming the chirp of a bird that didn't know or care about viral news stories. But the peace was fragile. By mid-morning, I had succumbed to the itch. I didn't reinstall the main apps, but I opened the browser on my laptop. I shouldn't have. The story hadn't just stayed on the local news page. It had mutated. It had been picked up by those T accounts on Instagram and TikTok, the ones that take a screenshot of a dramatic comment section and turn it into a narrated video with a robotic voice. My life, my 5-year relationship, and my 2-year healing journey were being distilled into a 60-second clip for the entertainment of millions. I saw a new account I didn't recognize posting a side-by-side of the proposal and a photo that must have been pulled from one of my friend's old profiles, a picture of me and him from 3 years ago. The caption read, "The math isn't mathing, airport proposal exposed." I felt a fresh wave of nausea. It wasn't just a local scandal anymore. I was becoming a character in a digital urban legend. Each time I opened a new tab, there was another thread, another person weighing in on whether he was a narcissist or if I was just bitter. It was in that moment that I realized I couldn't do this anymore. It wasn't healthy. Seeing my own face, the face of a woman who had thought she was loved, being used as a thumbnail for a gossip video, was a level of violation I wasn't prepared for. I felt like I was being chased by a ghost that had suddenly gained the ability to speak to everyone but me. I went back to my phone and did what I should have done the second I saw that video. I deleted every social media app. Not just the ones I used, but everything. I needed the world to go dark. I needed to stop being a spectator to my own humiliation. I spent the afternoon cleaning my apartment. It was a frantic, desperate kind of cleaning, the kind where you scrub the baseboards until your knuckles are raw and reorganize your pantry by expiration date just to feel a sense of control over something. As I moved through the rooms, I realized how much of my identity I had tied up in the girl who was dumped. Even 2 years later, I was still the one left behind. This viral video had just reinforced that narrative, giving it a global audience. I sat down on the floor of my closet, surrounded by shoes and boxes of old sweaters, and I asked myself the question, what do I actually want? Do I want his head on a platter? Do I want the news station to issue a public apology? Do I want Maya to leave him? The honest answer was both yes and no. Yes, there was a part of me that wanted the universe to balance the scales. I wanted the lie to be corrected. I wanted the 3-year anniversary to be officially labeled a fraud. But as I sat there in the quiet of my closet, I realized that seeking that justice would require me to stay in the mud with him. To get the news station to retract the post, I would have to provide the proof. I would have to hand over my private photos, my private texts, my private pain. I would have to be the ex for a few more weeks, a few more months. And for what he had already been publicly shamed, my friends had seen to that. The comment section was a graveyard of his reputation. Even if the video stayed up, it was forever tainted. Anyone who bothered to read the comments would see the truth. He wouldn't have the perfect romantic story he wanted. He would have a story with an asterisk next to it, a story that people whispered about behind his back. I started to think about the paranoia. Was he going to harass me? I looked at my blocked list again. He was still there, silenced. I realized that my fear of him was actually a remnant of the power I used to give him. He wasn't a monster under the bed. He was just a man who was probably very, very scared right now. He was a man whose house of cards was falling down, and he had no one to blame but himself. He had agreed to the news coverage. He had provided the timeline. He had invited the world into his lie, and the world had responded by showing him the truth. I thought about Maya again. I wondered if she was the one who insisted on the 3-year timeline. Maybe he told her they'd been together that long because he had to explain away the first year where he was busy or traveling. If she believed they'd been together for 3 years, she was just as deceived as I was. Or maybe she knew. Maybe she was the one he was calling from our bed. But regardless of who she was now tied to a man who had been outed as a world-class deceiver on the local news. Her happiest day was now the day she became a meme for infidelity. I felt a strange sense of release. For the first time since Tuesday, the Truman Show feeling began to fade. The set wasn't real, and the actors were terrible, but I didn't have to stay in the studio. I could walk out the door. I didn't have to be the woman who proved him wrong. I just had to be the woman who lived her life as if he didn't exist. The greatest revenge wasn't a retraction or a lawsuit. It was indifference. It was becoming the woman who didn't care enough to even check the comments. I decided then that I wouldn't reach out to the news station again. I wouldn't send the January 2024 folder. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a part 2 to their story. I would let the video stay up an accidental monument to his own stupidity. Let the internet talk. Let the T accounts post their videos. Eventually the algorithm would find something else to obsess over: a cat playing a piano, a politician's gaffe, a different cheating scandal. The digital mob is fickle, and soon enough they would move on to their next meal. I went to my kitchen and made myself a real dinner, something that required more than 5 minutes of effort. I poured a glass of wine and sat at my table looking at the empty chair across from me. For 2 years, that empty chair had felt like a void, a reminder of what I had lost. But tonight, it just felt like a chair. It was a space for someone who was honest, someone who was real, someone who didn't need a news crew to validate their love. I thought about the advice people were giving me. Sue him, some said. Expose him more, others urged. But I knew that those people weren't the ones who had to live my life. They weren't the ones who had to look in the mirror and decide if they liked the person staring back. I wanted to be a person who valued her own peace over the destruction of someone else, even someone who deserved it. I looked at the January 2024 folder on my laptop one last time. I hovered the cursor over the delete button. My heart hammered. This was the only evidence I had left of our life together. If I deleted this, I was truly letting go of the last thread. I thought about the pumpkin patch, the New Year's kiss, the goofy face in the park. They were memories of a man who didn't exist. They were props from a play that had long since closed. I clicked delete. The screen blinked and the folder was gone. I felt a sudden sharp intake of breath, like the air was finally returning to my lungs. It was over. The lie, the truth, the overlap, the work trips, it was all just data that no longer had a home. I was no longer the girl who got Truman Showed. I was just a 35-year-old woman in a quiet apartment, finally ready to start the next chapter of a story that belonged entirely to her. The silence that followed the click of the delete button was profound. It wasn't just a digital erasure, it felt like a physical weight had been lifted from my chest, though it left a strange hollow ache in its place. For 5 years, those photos and files had been the anchors of my reality. Now they were gone. I sat in the blue light of my laptop screen for a long time watching the empty folder window. It felt like I had finally closed a book that I had been rereading for 2 years, hoping for a different ending that was never going to come. I realized then that the truth didn't need to be archived in a folder to be real. I knew what had happened, I knew who I was, and most importantly, I finally knew who he was. Sunday morning brought a different kind of quiet. I woke up and for the first time in nearly a week, the first thought in my head wasn't the airport video. Instead, I thought about coffee. I thought about the book I had started a month ago and abandoned. I thought about the yoga class I had been skipping. These were small, mundane things, but they felt like victories. They were signs that my life was beginning to reclaim its territory from the invasion of his scandal. I went to the kitchen and began my morning routine, intentionally moving slowly, savoring the tactile sensations of the world around me. The warmth of the mug, the steam rising in the sunlight, the cool wood of the floor beneath my feet. This was my reality. It was unscripted, unrecorded, and entirely mine. However, the Truman Show feeling didn't vanish overnight. It lingered in the back of my mind like a low-frequency hum. When I went for a walk in the park later that afternoon, I found myself looking at the couples on the benches with a newfound cynical edge. I saw a man laughing with a woman, and a part of me wondered, is he also in another city 3 days a week? Does she know his real name? I saw a couple holding hands, and I found myself wondering if they were performing for an audience they didn't know was there. It was a poison that Mark had left in my system, a fundamental distrust of the seen world. I realized that the greatest damage he had done wasn't the cheating, it was the way he had corrupted my ability to believe in the sincerity of others. I sat on a park bench and watched a group of children playing nearby. Their joy was so loud, so messy, and so obviously real. They didn't have brands to protect, they didn't have narratives to maintain, they were just there. I realized that if I let Mark's betrayal turn me into a permanent cynic, then he had won. If I spent the rest of my life looking for the lie in every truth, then I was still living in his world. I had to choose to trust again, not blindly, not foolishly, but as an act of defiance. I had to believe that most people aren't living double lives and that most love isn't a performance. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was a voice memo from Sarah. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the play button. Part of me was terrified that she was calling to tell me the story had taken another turn, that Mark had issued a statement, or that the news station had doubled down. But I took a deep breath and listened. Hey, her voice was soft, devoid of the fire from the previous few days. I just wanted to check in. We've all gone quiet on the comments like you asked. It's actually starting to slow down. People are moving on to some celebrity breakup now. I'm sorry I went so hard, honey. I was just so angry for you. But I realize now that my anger was just keeping you stuck in the middle of it. I'm deleting my own screenshots today. We're done with him. Let's go get brunch next weekend. No phone talk, just us. I felt a lump form in my throat. This was the support I actually needed, not a digital lynch mob, but a friend who was willing to let the fire die out so I could breathe. I messaged her back, agreeing to brunch, and felt another layer of the Truman Show set fall away. My friends weren't actors. They were real people who made mistakes out of love. They weren't part of a script. They were the co-authors of my real life. As the day progressed, I felt a strange sense of mourning for Maya, the woman I had never met. I thought about her 3-year anniversary again. Whether she was a victim or a co-conspirator, she was now tied to a man who had built their foundation on the ruins of someone else's life. If she was a victim, she was currently in the honeymoon phase of a deception that would eventually crumble. If she was a co-conspirator, she was living with the constant fear that if he did it with her, he would eventually do it to her. Neither position was enviable. I realized that by walking away and refusing to fight for a retraction, I was actually the lucky one. I was out. I was free. I was no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop because the shoe had already fallen and I had simply stepped over it. I spent the evening writing in my journal, trying to process the concept of the lie versus the truth. Mark's lie was loud, public, and polished. It had piano music and airport lighting. My truth was quiet, private, and messy. It was a folder of deleted photos and a woman sitting alone in her apartment. But the quiet truth is always heavier than the loud lie. It has more gravity. It has more soul. I realized that I didn't need the world to know my truth for it to be valid. The truth doesn't require a majority vote to exist. It just is. As I look back on this week, I feel like I've aged 10 years in 5 days. I feel like I've been through a war that no one else can see. But I also feel a strength I didn't know I had. I survived the Truman Show. I saw the walls of my reality crumble, and I didn't fall apart with them. I stood my ground, I protected my peace, and I chose myself over the drama. I'm still healing, and I know there will be days when the what ifs and the how could he's come back to haunt me. But those days will be fewer and farther between. Before I close this chapter, I want to ask you, the person listening to this story, something. We've all been in situations where we felt like the world we knew was a lie. We've all had those moments where we discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about our past. What would you do in my shoes? Would you have sent that email to the news station? Would you have fought for the retraction? Or would you have done what I did and walked away into the silence? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your stories and your perspectives help me feel a little less alone in this Truman Show world. And if you've ever had to reclaim your own narrative from a liar, please subscribe and stay tuned for more stories about finding peace in the middle of the chaos. I closed my laptop and looked out the window. The city lights were twinkling a vast grid of thousands of lives, each with their own secrets, their own truths, and their own dramas. Somewhere out there, Mark was probably sitting with his fiancée, trying to figure out how to spin the comments into something he could survive. And somewhere out there, Maya was either questioning everything or doubling down on a lie. But here in this room, there was only me. And for the first time in a very long time, that was more than enough. I was 35, I was honest, and I was finally truly moving forward. The space where that digital folder used to be felt like a physical hole in my desk, a gap in the timeline of my life that I had finally voluntarily created. I sat there for a long time, the fan of my laptop, whirring in the quiet room, wondering if I would regret it. Would there be a day, a year from now, when I'd want to look at his face again? Would I ever need to prove the truth to a lawyer, a friend, or a stranger? But as the minutes ticked by, the anxiety didn't come. Instead, there was only a vast, cool stillness. I had spent 2 years trying to heal from a wound I didn't fully understand, and this week I had finally seen the jagged glass still stuck in the skin. Deleting that folder was the act of pulling it out. It hurt, it bled, but for the first time the wound was clean. The next few weeks were a lesson in the art of disappearance. I stayed true to my word and kept the social media apps off my phone. At first, it was like a phantom limb. My thumb would reflexively drift to the spot on the screen where Instagram used to sit. I'd feel a spike of cortisol, a desperate need to know if the T accounts had posted anything new, if the news station had finally caved to the comments, or if Mark had made his profile public again to defend himself. But I'd catch myself, take a breath, and lock the phone. I started leaving it in the other room when I ate dinner. I started taking long walks without it. Slowly, the noise of the digital world began to recede, replaced by the actual sounds of my neighborhood, the wind in the trees, the distant hum of traffic, the mundane reality of people living lives that had nothing to do with me. I found out later through a brief and reluctant update from Sarah that the news station never did take the video down. They simply turned off the comments once the controversy reached a fever pitch. It sat there, a love takes flight proposal with a locked comment section, a digital tombstone for a lie. Mark apparently had scrubbed his entire online presence. His LinkedIn was gone, his Instagram was deactivated, and according to rumors, he was taking a leave of absence from work. The public shaming had done its work, but I found that I didn't care about the details anymore. His downfall wasn't the fuel for my recovery, it was just a side effect of his own choices. I didn't need to watch the building burn to know it was no longer standing. The Truman Show feeling, the sense that my life was a staged performance, took the longest to fade. I'd be at the grocery store picking out apples, and I'd suddenly wonder if the person behind me knew. Did they see the video? Did they recognize me as the ex from the comments? It made me feel exposed, like I was walking through the world without skin. But therapy helped. My therapist, a calm woman who had seen 1,000 variations of betrayal, told me something that stayed with me. He didn't just lie to you. He stole your sense of safety. Reclaiming that safety isn't about knowing what everyone else thinks. It's about knowing that your eyes are the ones that matter. I began to focus on the things that were undeniably real. I went back to the pottery class I'd started months ago. There is something incredibly grounding about putting your hands in cold, wet clay. You can't fake it. You can't lie to the wheel. If you aren't centered, the pot collapses. It was a perfect metaphor for my life. For years, I had been trying to build something on a wheel that was off balance, and I had blamed myself when the clay flew off. Now I was learning how to find my own center first. I made a bowl, then a vase, then a set of mugs. They were imperfect, slightly lopsided, and completely honest, they were mine. I also had to deal with the fear, the deep structural fear that I would never be able to trust a man again. How do you go on a date when you know that a person can look you in the eyes for 5 years while living a double life for one of them? I'd look at men at the coffee shop and find myself looking for the tell? The flicker of a secret, the vibration of a phone hidden in a pocket. It felt like a disability, a phantom pain in my heart. But then one evening, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset, and I realized that my ability to trust wasn't a gift I gave to others. It was a capacity I held within myself. Mark hadn't taken my trust, he had simply proven himself unworthy of it. There are billions of people in the world who aren't Mark. To punish them for his crimes would be to let him keep ruling my life from afar. 1 month after the video went viral, I was walking home from work when I saw a man proposing to a woman in the park. It wasn't a grand gesture with lilies and a news crew. It was just 2 people near a fountain, and he was fumbling with a small box while she laughed and cried at the same time. A week ago, that sight would have made me bitter. It would have felt like a mockery. But that day, I just smiled and kept walking. Their story was theirs, and mine was mine. The 3-year lie was a footnote in a book I had finally finished. I was 35, I was single, and I was deeply, profoundly at peace. The most important lesson I learned through all of this, the viral video, the public shaming, the digital receipts, is that your value is not a public consensus. It doesn't matter what a news station reports or what 1,000 strangers in a comment section believe. The only thing that is real is the life you live when the cameras aren't rolling and the phones are put away. I had been Truman trapped in a world made of cardboard and lies, but I had finally found the door at the edge of the horizon. I had stepped through it, and while I didn't know what was on the other side, I knew it was real. Before I leave this story behind for good, I want to talk to you. We live in a world where everything is recorded, where our most private heartbreaks can become public entertainment in the blink of an eye. If you've ever felt like your reality was being rewritten by someone else, if you've ever been Truman Show-ed by a person you loved, I want you to know that you are the only one who holds the pen to your story. You don't have to fight every lie, and you don't have to defend your truth to people who aren't even listening. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away and be happy. Have you ever had a moment where a single piece of information changed your entire past? How did you handle the fallout? I'd love for you to share your experiences in the comments below. It's in sharing these messy, unscripted truths that we help each other heal. And if you want to hear more stories about finding clarity in a world of deception, consider subscribing. It means a lot to have you here. I walked into my apartment, the air smelling of the lavender candles I'd lit earlier. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look for his name. I just sat on my velvet couch, picked up my book, and began to read. The sun set, the room grew dark, and I didn't feel the need to turn on the light just yet. I was okay with the quiet. I was okay with being alone. I was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where I was supposed to be.